This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. In today's podcast, we present a lecture given to the Security Studies Committee on February 15, 2012, by Dr. Pierre Pahlavi of the Canadian Forces College. Dr. Pahlavi's topic, the Arab Spring in Iranian Perspective.
Thank you very much. Salam, good afternoon, bonjour, bon après-midi. Thank you very much for having me here. I would like to extend my thanks to Chris Corrigan and Eric Morse. It's always a surprise that such institutions are accepting Iranians to deliver a speech here, especially when they're bearded. Be reassured, I'm not wearing any explosive device. I thought it was a very timely topic to speak about. Usually I spoke about Iran and its strategic ambitions, but it definitely the current affairs demand that I speak about Iran and the Arab Spring. Before anything else, I will ask your indulgence about my English. It's only my third language. Don MacDonald, with whom I've worked many years at the Canadian Forces College, knows that I generally present in French. So I will try to be as clear and as transparent as possible in this third language. But speaking of language, I will say a few words in Persian, and be reassured, those are not bad words on you. You can just tape me and ask somebody to translate. So امیدوارم که شنید جلسه به عربت مطلوب برای مملکت گل و بلبل خال باشد, which means that I hope that this presentation and the questions and answers that will ensue will probably or hopefully bodes for a favorable future for Iran, which the Iranian call generally the country of the dove and the rose. Before it was called the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is an ugly name in my view. So you've probably noticed Middle East is undergoing a geopolitical remodeling of an unprecedented magnitude, unprecedented since the organization of this regional security complex in the immediate aftermath of World War I. This transformation is very similar in scope with other similar geopolitical earthquakes, such as the European revolutions of 1848, of which the Arab Spring derived its names. It's in French, for example, those are called Le Printemps des Peuples. This is the Arab Spring. It is also similar in scope with the transformation brought about by the fall and the collapse of the communist bloc in the early 1990s. What we're witnessing, beyond any doubt, is a major reshuffling likely to generate a questioning of the pro-Western status quo which was sustained so far by the United States and its regional and extra-regional allies. It's a major reshuffling, also likely to generate an increased competition between the regional and non-regional countries willing or interested in filling the void that is probably going to be left by Western powers and their supporters in this region.
Okay.
So next one, please. Okay. I've lost one page.
Make it up. We won't notice it.
You won't notice. It's okay. This country, Iran's foreign policy, has been making the headlines of global media for 30 years. Not a days goes by without this country or its foreign policy being discussed, analyzed by Western observers, and yet, despite all this attention, the inner logic or the core logic of this country's foreign policy remain a mystery for many observers, especially the Western observers. These observers are generally surprised by this country's actions and initiatives. And lately, Iran has accumulated even more contradictions and paradoxes. It's a country that was among the first to actually applaud the Arab revolt, the Arab pro-democratic revolt in Tunisia and Egypt, for example. But the same country did repress with an exceptional brutality the pro-democratic demonstration at home in the main city of Iran, Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, and so on. This country that has brought its moral and logistic support, and I could discuss the logistic part, its logistic support to the Shia insurrection in Bahrain, and we know that since today we know that this insurrection is not ended yet. But the same country is bringing its moral and logistic support this time to the repression exercised by the Syrian regime against the pro-democratic movement at home. All these contradictions have led many observers and analysts to describe Iran's foreign policy as a schizophrenic one. This is a term that is recurrent in the analysis of Iran's foreign policy. A schizophrenic one, a contradictory one, an improvised one, an irrational one, full of contradictions and paradoxes. What I'm going to try to do before turning to the Arab Spring per se is try to convince you, at least, that this foreign policy is indeed, in fact, very coherent, very consistent with who the Iranians are and what they really want. In other terms, it is very consistent with this country's strategic culture. Indeed, when you want to next, please. When you want to understand the core logic of any country's foreign policy, you have to have a grasp of its strategic culture. In the case of Iran, this strategic culture, or Iran's strategic identity, is of course shaped by its history, as it is the case for any other country. In the case of Iran, it is a result of a very long, a millennia-long history, since, as you know, Iran is the heir to one of the oldest civilizations in the world. It has been the cradle of many forms of scientific breakthroughs, scientific inventions. It has been also the laboratory of the very first form of organized political institutions, the first form of state government, and the first form of pre-Westphalian empires. Of course, our people from India and Pakistan would dispute this fact, but they are sharing this prestige of having developed this form of political institutions. The Iranians are very, very proud and nostalgic about Iran's past grandeur. They tend to look at Iran's history and past Iran's civilization as the golden age. They keep in mind very, very closely, they keep in mind the souvenir of the Achaemenid Empire, the Sassanid empires, the Safavid empires, which are great and prestigious empire of the past. From this pride, the Iranians are deriving a feeling of superiority, a complex of superiority, which tend to take the shape of some form of condescendence. when you speak to an Iranian, and maybe you have the occasion of dialoguing with an Iranian, there are many here in Toronto, up to 80,000 Iranians are living here in Toronto. When you have the occasion to talk with an Iranian, he or she are very prompt at comparing their own civilization with the civilization in the West. They, very quantitatively speaking, they compare their 5,000 year of history with the 2,000 year of history of countries like Italia, and even more viciously, I would say, compare their 5,000 years of history with the 200 or 300 years of North American countries. And they also derive from this pride a desire to see Iran retrieve what they consider is its legitimate place in the pantheon of great powers. They firmly believe that Iran is a country that has been dispossessed of its natural fate, which is to be a great international power. Quite ironically, this complex of superiority coexists or cohabits with its contrary. And the contrary not being a feeling of inferiority, no, the Iranians are too proud of themselves to feel inferior, but a complex of vulnerability. It's the certitude that Iran is a very fragile country. It is a fragile country that is facing threats, external threats. This complex of vulnerability is also shaped by Iran history. Iran very ancient history, which is, as you know, replete with many forms of successive invasion and military conquest. Iran has been invaded, of course, by the Greeks, by the Islamic and Arabic people, and in the 7th century, Iran has been subjected to several waves of Turkic and Afghan invasion between the 8th and the 18th century. Iran has been invaded by the Afghan. This tells you that how much this country has been subjected by invasion by pretty much anybody. So the Iranians have this story, this history of being invaded militarily, but Iran's more recent history doesn't make exception to that rule. Iran's more recent history in the 19th and 20th century is also replete with other form of external interventions, although more subtle form of interventions that take the form of Western interference, starting with the great game of influence between Britain and Russia for the control of Persia and Central Asia. The Brits, which I open a bracket here, are called by the Iranians not the great Satan, but the little one. And they tend to believe that the Brits are behind all the master plan developed by the enemy, by the United States. They are the brain, whereas the Americans are the strength, the armed force. So the Brits have a history of intervening very often in Iranian internal affairs, starting in 1908, right after the first constitutional revolution. Iran has known 3 revolutions in the 20th century. The British came back again during World War II in 1942 to get rid of Reza Shah Pahlavi, who they suspected of collaborating too closely with the Nazi regime of Germany. And then they passed the baton to the Americans, who developed also a tradition of intervening in Iran's internal affairs, starting with the very famous 1953 coup staged by the CIA as part of the Eisenhower doctrine, and the goal of which was not to topple the Shah of that period. On the contrary, the idea was to get rid of his prime minister, a leftist prime minister, but a nationalist one too, Prime Minister Mossadegh, who wanted to nationalize Iran's petroleum, but also who was suspected, for that matter, of collaborating not with Berlin this time, but with Moscow. And the more recent years have also illustrated this trend of external interventions. The latest form or the latest illustrations is the current so-called secret war, which includes, of course, the very famous Stuxnet attack, which is a computer worm that has been designed to target and neutralize Iran's nuclear program. I could develop on that, speaking of the very limited life expectancy of Iranian scientists nowadays, but this is not the point. The point is that these successive interventions have cultivated amongst the Iranian a very strong feeling, which is one of the pillars of Iran's strategic culture. It is a syndrome of besieged citadel. The Iranians have the feeling, the conviction, whether they are part of the current regime or the ancient regime, whether they are communist or Islamist, they have this feeling that Iran is a fortress, an exceptional one, of course, the most beautiful one, but it's a fortress, a fragile one, that is surrounded by foreign powers that are constantly plotting and willing to meddle in with this country's internal affairs to reduce and restrict its independence, its sovereignty, and, if possible, to take control over its resources with the hydrocarbons resources at first. So the conclusion on that point is that Iran's strategic culture results from these two coexisting a complex of superiority. Iran is a unique country with a mission, with a unique identity and history, and at the same time this complex of vulnerability, always subjected to external form of interventions. Next one, please. Next slide, please. I can do without the slides if you want.
No, there we go.
Here we go. So two foreign policy goals stem from this dual complex of superiority and vulnerability. On the one, two facets of Iran's foreign policy that may appear to be contradictory, but which complete each other and reinforce each other. On the one hand, you have the internal facet, which is about guaranteeing Iran's independence and sovereignty by securing its territorial integrity and securing the survival of whatever regime is ruling this country. This is the internal facet, the protective facet, if you will. On the other hand, you have the external dimension of Iran's foreign policy, which is about projecting Iran's influence regionally and to impose Iran as the regional superpower. And it would seem contradictory with the first one, but the idea is actually to construct around Iran a protective sphere of influence, a buffer zone, if you will. So those two facets converge to produce a very simple and yet fundamental strategic principle that was, for example, formulated by Napoleon when he used to say the best defense is to adopt an offensive stance. So the best way for the Iranian to protect their country is to develop a sphere of influence regionally and further if possible. Next one, please. So this dual strategy of survival and power maximization is nothing exceptional to Iran. It's nothing exceptional because, for example, when I was presenting this very speech at the NATO Defense College this summer, a representative from the Arab Spring noted that this is exactly what Israel is trying to do nowadays in its own part of the Middle East. But this dual strategy was actually practiced by all regimes that have ruled Iran, irrespective of their ideological or political leanings. This was practiced by all dynasties, including the Safavid in the 17th and 18th century, the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century. It was, of course, practiced by the Pahlavi in the 20th century, and also by the latest dynasty at the head of this country, the dynasty of the mullah and the imams. What they have, so the fundamentals are always the same. Only the modus operandi, the style, change. When they arrived in power, the mullahs adopted a very aggressive stance, a very aggressive approach to pursue these two goals, and they've tried to project Iran's revolutionary and Islamic values to try to secure this young and fragile Islamic republic by constructing around this country, by erecting a wall of Islamic regimes. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for everybody else, they failed. They failed and soon realized that they had to adopt a more cautious, a more realist approach imposed by their geopolitical and ideological isolation. So by the end of the 80s, and more specifically, a few months after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, and a few months before his own death, Ayatollah Khomeini, the first supreme guide of the Islamic Republic, issued a fatwa, which is a religious decree stipulating that Iranian had to, he called for a pause basically, saying that Iran has to set aside its revolutionary approach, its aggressive approach, to return to a realpolitik logic articulated around what I call the triple P, or the three Ps of Iran's foreign policy, in reference to, of course, to Canada's three Ds. What are those three P? The first one is prudence. Prudence, it's the idea that given Iran's technological, military, and economic weakness, this country has, at any price, to avoid confrontation, direct confrontation with its enemies, with Israel, with the Russian as well. We could develop on the relationship with Russia, and of course the Western powers, and adopt more indirect approach to pursue its goals. Pragmatism. It follows from Khomeini's fatwa. It's the idea that the maximization of Iran's interest, hardcore interest, must from then on take precedence over the promotion of Iran's revolutionary or Islamic values, which may sound counterintuitive here in the West, as we tend to think of Iran as an eminently ideological power, whereas it is actually a very realist and realpolitik country. And the final P also is the result of the two first one, is patience. It's the idea that given Iran is feeble, it's fragile, it has to be pragmatic, therefore it has to pursue its foreign policy in the long term. And it's the idea that Iran, it's the certitude, here comes maybe the less rational part of Iran's foreign policy, it's the idea that Iran will prevail in the future. It's a question of time, and that time is working for this country. It's the idea that Iran has survived for so many centuries and millennia. It will survive and prevail at one time in the future. Next one, please. Okay, what the mullahs, the ayatollahs, and the guardians also realized very quickly, that is at the end of the 80s, during the 90s especially, it's that Iran had to compensate for its lack of hard power by relying not only on soft power, but on any options, any tools at the disposal of the regime. The idea was to combine them in an optimal way to realize or to conduct what I call a 360-degree strategy, which is very similar to the so-called Chinese unrestricted warfare strategy. It's the idea that you use religion to obtain points or to score points at the level of energy, confrontation with the West, and so on and so forth. So a very clever, very imaginative strategy of the poor and the weak. And so they have combined those elements that form the mullah's strategic toolkits. So let's look for a moment in this strategic toolbox and see what are the instruments used by the Iranians. You have, of course, the ideological resources. The ideology, religion, which is, again, I insist on that, not an end in itself, but a mean at the service of Iran's very realistic foreign policy. So those resources include pan-Shiism. It's a pan-Shia policy, if you will, that is conducted within the Shia world, of which Iran is the historical leader. Pan-Islamism, which is conducted in the larger Muslim world. The idea is to promote a rapprochement between the Shia and the majority of the Sunni countries, successful to some extent, not in others. The Iranians are members, for example, recently gained a seat at the Arab League, although they are not an Arab country themselves, which is viewed in Iran as a form of success of this pan-Islamic policy. And outside the Middle East, outside the Muslim world, the Iranian, in a very opportunistic manner, opportunism is something that defines this foreign policy, resort to other values or invoke other values that resonate better with other societies, with non-Muslim societies, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where the Iranians are more and more active, but also resonate better with the Latin American people. Since, as you know, Iran is very active in that region of the world. I will come back to that later. You also have the paramilitary tools, of which the Revolutionary Guard Corps, created at the time of the Islamic Revolution to guard the revolution, but also to project Iran's influence outward in the region. The guards, also called the Pasdaran, form, if you will, this institution formed the cornerstone of Iran's irregular warfare system, which has several branches outside Iran. One of the most famous one, actually an institution of which nobody talked very recently a lot, but that is acquiring a lot of attention lately, especially with the killing of Israeli diplomats in Bangkok, in the Caucasus and elsewhere. It's the Al-Quds force. It is basically an elite force, special force institution. It is also Iran's foreign legion, very active, very well trained, composed of Iranian but also of Arab people. And this force, this institution, is active, of course, in the Middle East, especially in the south of Lebanon, but lately has acquired new playground in Northern Africa. According to the latest news, they're active in Libya, for example. They're active in the Horn of Africa. They are also very active in Latin America and elsewhere. I've been told, for example, and this needs to be confirmed, that they do have a branch here in Toronto, which is very worrisome. And of course, this irregular warfare system is also conducted through Iran's proxies, which includes, of course, Hezbollah, the pro-Iranian militia, created in '82 by the Guardians themselves, but also Hamas, depends on what period you are talking about. Although Ismail Haniyeh, which is the leader of Hamas, was in Tehran this week. I'm saying that because there were rumors that Iran and the Hamas were actually diverging, and other proxies, the Jihad Islamic, and so on and so forth. In Iran's toolbox, you finally have the energy assets, which includes the hydrocarbon weapon that, of course, the Iranians are using as part of their threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, but also that has a more discreet and yet very efficient facet consisting of Iran's very clever pipeline politics conducted in Tajikistan, in Pakistan, and other Central Asian countries. And of course, I couldn't review Iran's strategic tools without mentioning the nuclear weapon. Whether Iran has this weapon or not remains to be seen, although they seem to be working very hard to actually close the gap to actually master this technology. President Ahmadinejad just unveiled the fact that Iran is mastering some new form of technology centrifuges in that domain. I tend to agree on that topic with the U.S. intelligence community when they say that it's not sure whether Iran is actually trying to acquire that weapon. What is certain, however, is that Iran is trying to acquire the capability, which is a very important nuance. I think the Iran made the calculus that it may not be very interesting to have that weapon. It's expensive. You have responsibility coming with that. But having the capability, the know-how to develop one, if necessary, is way more interesting. Therefore, trying to emulate the status of, for example, Germany or Japan, being a sub-nuclear power with the capability of developing one. But we could speculate on that forever, and probably the Iranians will have developed their weapon before we resolve it. Before having a nuclear weapon per se, what is certain is that the Iranians have been using this nuclear blackmailing as a propaganda lever. In waiting for having a weapon of mass destructions, what they have developed is a very powerful weapon of mass persuasion that they have used to play the patriotic chord of the Iranians. The Iranians are very nationalist before being religious or Shia zealots. They are nationalists. This has to be considered. And they are also using this propaganda lever to excite the anti-Western sentiment in many different nations in the Middle East. They are exciting the anti-Western sentiment specifically in the Arab street. This was one of the main source of influence for Iran. But what has to be kept in mind here, I caution on that, is that those elements must not be considered separately. We have this tendency here in the West to compartmentalize those different instruments, of course, for good reasons to obsess about Iran's nuclear program, but we have to keep in mind that those elements are merely tools. They are merely means to strategic ends. Again, the goal of survival and power and influence maximization. So the danger is to miss the Iranian strategic forest by concentrating too much on those specific components. Next one, please. We're already here. Maybe I will just skip that one. Oh, just this one. Sorry. The Iranians tend to send mixed signals generally. The Iranians are not trying to win by actually obtaining a large-scale victory. They perfectly know that they cannot obtain such a victory over the West, over the Israeli. Their military way weaker than the GCC country, the Arab countries. However, they are certain that they can win by not losing. This is really important to keep in mind to understand the Iranian foreign policy. I think that Henry Kissinger just captured the essence of Iran's foreign policy. Next one, please. So, this is for the theory. Let's see how it was applied over the past 20 years. And I'll try to be as quick as possible. So during the 90s, I told you that the Iranian turned to a realpolitik logic in 1989, right after the Iran-Iraq war. So they developed this realpolitik, realist, cautious, prudent, and pragmatic strategy during the 90s. And during that last decade of the 20th century, this approach allowed Iran to score very important points, such as the subjugation of Syria, which basically has become a colony, an Iranian colony, with the Guards having a very strong influence on the military infrastructure there. This strategy also allowed Iran to take roots in Lebanon through the Hezbollah, which was created by the Guardians, where through the Hezbollah, Iran managed to become a real state within the state in Lebanon. They control the political life over there. And also through the Hezbollah, they managed to build what I call a virtual border with Iran's arch enemy. Of course, it's Israel. So these three elements constitute the backbone of Iran's strategic network in the Middle East. However, it's obvious this is really modest. Iran has had up until the end of the 90s only two close allies, and even then it was difficult to call them allied. So the scope of Iran's regional influence remained relatively limited. It was limited basically because it was checked by three dams, if you want, or three rival regimes. Of course, the GCC, the Gulf countries, the Gulf Cooperation countries, led by Saudi Arabia. I will come back to that later. But it was checked more closely in geographical terms because of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan and because of the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq. Of course, these regimes have been removed because of the Western intervention in Afghanistan first and in Iraq in a second time. By doing so, the Western involuntarily hopefully involuntarily broke Iran's deadlock by removing the Taliban. They gave Iran more leeway to gain a foothold in Afghanistan, where it must be reminded, where the Iranians were completely absent formerly. Actually, maybe you know that, maybe you don't. The Islamic regime was the first more starched enemy of the Taliban regime. Tehran even considered a military intervention in Afghanistan before 2001 to remove the Salafists and the Taliban in Afghanistan. So by removing the Taliban, they opened a new sphere of influence for Iran that Iran have been exploiting since then, at the expense of the NATO forces, actually. By removing Saddam Hussein, which was the worst enemy of Tehran, the Iranian also progressively made Iraq into a satellite. They have satellized Iraq, which was ruled for the very first time in its history by a Shia majority. Iraq became the second country to be ruled by a Shia majority in the Middle East after Iran. But it was basically a gift to the Ayatollahs. Of course, this wasn't the intention. And finally, in 2006, the Iranian won a victory by proxy, a symbolic victory during the so-called 33-day war, which was actually won on ground by the Hezbollah against Sahel. It's not a military victory, but they won that victory on the psychological front, allowing Iran to actually dispute for the very first time, to question Israel's supremacy. So by the end of the decade, Iran's regional influence was already so developed, already such that some Western specialists started to use the term Pax Iranica to describe the new configuration of power in the Middle East. Actually, I remember one U.S. general, one American general of Iranian origin, of course, it must be mentioned, General Abizadeh, who said famously that despite its military and technological inferiority, Iran at the end of the 2000s was already the regional superpower. All right. So, this brings us to today, or almost today. This brings us to 12 months ago, at the beginning of the Arab Spring. And to the question of how this Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring, may have affected the Islamic regime. So I will cut my answer in two, look at what was the effect domestically, and then we can consider the impact or the implications for Iran's foreign policy. So the Arab revolt wave did hit the Iranian regime. A year ago, as in February, you did have revolts and demonstrations, pro-democratic demonstrations led by the Green Movement in the streets of Tehran, Tabriz, Isfahan, Mashhad, and other large Iranian cities. So the Iranian Spring did revive the Green Movement, which was moribund since 2009. Remember, the Green Movement developed right after the contested presidential election in 2009. It was moribund, it was revived and rejuvenated by the Arab Spring. But this Green Movement, for many different reasons, was actually suppressed very brutally by the Guardians. So it's possible to conclude that this wave, this pro-democratic wave, was not strong enough to shake the Islamic regime. Why is so? There are many different explanations. There are several explanations. I will try to capture them. First, we tend to think here in the West that Iran is a Muslim country, therefore what happens to one Muslim country must also happen to Iran. But the Islamic Republic is radically different from the regime that collapsed over the past year. The Islamic regime is not that of Mubarak. It is very different from the one of Ben Ali in Tunisia. What does this mean? It means that it is not a Kemalist or a post-Kemalist regime that is 100% disconnected from its popular aspiration. Actually, whether we like it or not, and I personally don't like it, the Islamic regime is still very close to the Persian street, which wasn't the case for the Mubarak regime, which was an empty shell. Another advantage of the Islamic regime is that it does not bear the stigma of the collaboration with the West. It never collaborated with the West. It was not put in place by the West. It was always adopted an anti-Western positioning, which make it more legitimate. The Islamic Republic, several elements that must be kept in mind. It's a Persian regime, it's a Shia regime, but it's more importantly a regime that is born itself out of a revolution. It is itself a result of a popular movement. It is a hybrid regime that is the result of a synthesis between democracy and theocracy, which make it way more robust than the other regime that collapsed. It is more legitimate, not in my eyes, but in the eyes of the Iranians, in the eyes of many people in the Middle East, at least so far, and it is, for that reason, more stable. Unlike the Arab regime, the Islamic regime is vaccinated, if you will, has developed some immunity against this type of popular unrest and turmoil. it has developed its own antibody system, and the main element is the Revolutionary Guard and the Basij militias, which are controlling the Iranian population at home. And these institutions are masters in the art of counter-revolution. The Revolutionary Guard have been created to guard the revolution, and they're very good at that. They have a very good know-how in this domain. They're actually exporting their counter-revolutionary skills in Syria as we speak today. Finally, the so-called green movement, in which we tend to place a lot of hope in here in the West, is not nearly as well structured than what we think here. The leadership is shaky. People like Mousavi and Karoubi are themselves product of the Islamic Republic system. Mousavi, who is presented as the Iranian Martin Luther King or the Iranian Gandhi, is in fact a former prime minister. He actually developed the current constitution. He is himself in favor of the nuclear program. So there is no alternative, legitimate or credible alternative as we speak today. So the other question is maybe more important, is whether the Arab Spring presented Iran with new opportunities to increase its influence in the Middle East. Here I would just articulate my answer into three periods. In the immediate, yes, it was a gift from heaven for the regime. In the immediate, Iran took advantage of the following. The Arab Spring acted as a diversion, a smokescreen, if you want, behind which the Iranians have continued to develop their nuclear program. Actually, the past year was exceptional for Tehran. During 1 year, or about 1 year, nobody was talking about the Iranian nuclear program. So it was a great opportunity for them. Secondly, the Arab Spring and the situation in North Africa boosted the oil price, increasing the flow of petrodollars in the bank of the Islamic regime, the same petrodollars that the regime has been using to just finance its domestic and social policy, to obtain or to reinforce the allegiance and loyalty of the Iranians towards the regime. Finally, still in the immediate, the Iranians were very happy to see the development of what they called the Islamic awakening. What they saw was the blossoming of new regime organized around the Sharia from Iraq to Algeria or to Tunisia. So it was also something that pleased them a lot. In the short to medium terms, that is over the past, let's say, 8 months, Iran may have benefited also from the following. First, the elimination or the weakening of opposing leaders such as Mubarak and Saleh or Ben Ali, which were up to then very strong opponents of the mullah's regime. The Arab Spring also had the effect of neutralizing rival powers such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. I will develop that in a moment. It has also contributed to expand Iran's playground to countries like Bahrain. The Iranians are very active today in that country, in Yemen and Egypt, in the Horn of Africa, and further. So the landlock, the strategic landlock of Iran's foreign policy has exploded. The only black spot, of course, is the weakening of the Syrian ally, and I will develop that. For the year 2011 at least, the regional unrest put Iran adversary on the defensive, and they played to one of Iran's demonstrated strengths. It's the ability to exploit instability and divisions to create order out of chaos. They're very good at that, and the unrest, those revolts, those rebellions, and revolutions, the collapse of those regimes have just created a lot of opportunity for Iran. So, what are what is Iran's perception on the fate of its principal enemies or rivals? How do they look at Israel, Saudi Arabia, and United States today? So let's put ourselves in the seat of the mullahs, the imams, and the guardians. To them, Tehran perceived that Israel is actually facing very important strategic challenges, amongst which the fact that the Turkish-Israeli ties have hit a historical low, and they believe that this long-standing alliance cannot be resurrected anytime soon. Israel has also lost its most strategically important Arab partner, the Mubarak government in Egypt. Actually, maybe Israel is on the verge of finding out that it has as its border an Islamic regime developing, which is more worrisome. More importantly, Israel seems no longer to be able to rely on the indefectible or unconditional support of Washington. At least, this seems to be the case with the current Obama administration. For all these reasons, the Iranians believe that Israel is more isolated than ever and condemned to become a bunker in the Middle East. For Tehran, the Arab Spring has also weakened Saudi Arabia. It has shaken the GCC alliance and the pro-Saudian network. Egypt and Tunisia, which used to be very close allies of the GCC, are now on a new course. Bahrain is threatened again as we speak, and the Yemeni wall seems on the verge of collapsing, of crumbling. The Iranians are convinced that the Arabian Peninsula is the last free square of the old regional order, and that, again, time is working in favor of the Islamic regime. Finally, we're still looking at the region from the Iranian standpoint. Next one, please. Finally, the Iranians are convinced, and this is maybe the only point on which I would agree with them, is that the United States are no longer able today or no longer willing to provide regional leadership. To them, it makes no doubt that the United States is broke financially, overstretched militarily, and exhausted politically and psychologically. According to them, the increasing tensions between Washington and Riyadh, between Washington and Jerusalem, are evidences of a U.S. strategic withdrawal. To them, it makes no doubt that the United States has made the conscious calculus of retreating from the Middle East because it has no more interest in that region, no more direct interest. And maybe they're right on that point, at least in the medium term. Tehran's ambition is to capitalize on the declining U.S., Israeli, Saudi statu quo, and they want to use that opportunity to create what President Ahmadinejad has called a new Middle East. A new Middle East, and insist, without the United States and Israel. However, that's in Iranians' dream. Things might become more complicated for them in the future. Further modifications of the Middle East can prove to be detrimental to Iran's interest and influence. The more the Middle East change, the more Arab states emerge reformed from this geopolitical transformation, the more likely is Iran to lose its historical special status in the Middle East. The status that it has acquired since 1971, that is, the status of the sole beacon of the Muslim world or the only champion of the Arab streets. There are other champions of the Arab streets. There are other Islamic countries developing. Iranian influence is already on the decline due to regional a few months ago, a year ago, Iran and Hezbollah were held as heroes in the resistance of the Muslim world against Israel, against the West. Today, no one longer speaks of the Iranian model, and the Iranian regime is ranked among the authoritarian systems. The obsolescence of the Iranian model could be accelerated by several factors. It could be accelerated by the legislative elections of March 2001, that is in 2 weeks from now, March the 2nd, especially if the street is tempted by a Persian Spring. However, I wouldn't rejoice too much on that possibility. I doubt that this will happen, but anything is possible. However, more seriously, more probably, and yet very paradoxically, the obsolescence of the Iranian model could also be accelerated by the domestic rise of the Pasdaran, of the Guardians. You may know this, you may not know this, but the Guardians have acquired a very central role. They have become the epicenter of power in the Iranian political system since 2005. They are becoming the cornerstone of the current regime. Actually, they are gaining more influence than the clergy, with which they have developed a synergy relationship. So they occupy a central position, and you're going to ask me, so what's the problem? What's the effect of this rise in power of the Guardians on the decay of the Islamic regime? Well, it's simple. This takeover is accompanied by a militarization of the regime, a declericalization, if you will, a secularization. The regime is less and less religious. It is still very religious and based on the velayat faqih, but this is a facade. The regime is more and more nationalist, more and more in the hand of the Guardians. It is more and more a traditional form of military dictatorship. And this has the effect of reducing Iran's influence in the Middle East. Iran used to be the defensor of the Islamic faith. Today it is once again, as it was many times in its history, it appears as a Persian Shia state in a predominantly Arab and Sunni neighborhood. So its capacity of projecting its influence is reduced by all those factors. Next one, please. Well, of course, Iran's enemies are perfectly aware of Iran's problems, of Iran's declining influence, and they see that as a window of opportunity. Especially the US, Israel, and the Gulf monarchies would like to take this chance, this opportunity, to break finally the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah Shia axis. It's now or never. That's their view. This is what explains the increasing pressure on Damascus. The calculus is simple. And it is quite sound. If Syria falls, it would be a blow to the Hezbollah. The fall of the Alawid regime could also weaken the so-called Shia axis, or the so-called Shia crescent, which was denounced by this poor Mubarak. However, the collapse of the Alawid regime would not necessarily be fatal to the Islamic regime, to the Iranian Islamic Republic. And restoring, because this is what they are trying to do, restoring a pro-Western, pro-Saudi, pro-Israeli status quo may prove more difficult to realize than expected. But anything is possible. Other observers mention a different scenario that seems to me, unfortunately, maybe more probable, way more probable. Local politicians, such as Amr Moussa, the former head of the Arab League, have envisioned a drastically new regional order. They envision a new Middle East without Iran, but also without the pro-Western actors. A Middle East in which the Iranian influence would be reduced, but in which the influence of Washington, Jerusalem, and Saudi Arabia will also be reduced. They envision the emergence of a Sunni bloc of states whose foreign policy would be tied neither to Washington nor to Tehran. In this new regional complex, and these are all speculation, but it seems to me very probable. In this new regional security complex, Turkey, not Iran or the U.S., is seen as a potential leader, and the Iranians are perfectly aware of that, of the probability of this scenario. The Turkish model, and I'm not going to develop too much on that, has certain very strong advantages over the Iranian model. The Turkish model of society, based on the so-called light Islamism, the reality of which I adopt, but it's presented as a light Islamism, and a very successful, on that one I don't adopt, a very successful model of economic liberalization. There is currently a Turkish economic miracle that makes the Turkish model very attractive. And there is also Turkey's so-called zero-problem foreign policy developed by Ahmet Davutoglu, the very clever Turkish foreign minister. This is based on pragmatic multilateralism and humanitarian aid rather than ideological confrontation. This is a very, very imaginative foreign policy that actually applies Iran's 360 model better than the Iranian themselves. It allows Iran working with Turkey to work with NATO, to work with Russia, and to work at the same time with the Iranian. So working with everybody and just gaining points without actually investing too much effort. The Turkish Prime Minister is already polling higher than Ahmadinejad or Sheikh Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah in the Arab Spring. And many countries that are emerging from the Arab Spring, like Egypt and Tunisia, are actually starting to develop their political system by taking Turkey as the model. Whether Turkey will be able to create a neo-Ottoman empire remains to be seen. And in general, predictions are risky. However, I would like to conclude by the following parameters. First, Turkey's ability to exploit the appeal of its social and diplomatic model while balancing the increasing contradictions between its values and interests. This may prove harder to realize for Turkey, as it is no more an underdog, but presented as one of the key actors. The ability of Washington, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv to break the decline of their regional influence. I think that it's still too close to count United States, Israel, or Saudi Arabia out, or KO. The possibility that extra-regional actors such as Russia, India, and especially China exert an increasing influence on the regional chessboard. They may play an increasing role in the nearby future. But one factor that must not be neglected is Iran's legendary resilience and its proven ability to adapt even to the most demanding geopolitical modification. But in any case, and this is something on which I disagree with one of my colleagues very much, is that the future of the Arab world may be determined once again, may be shaped by non-Arab regional powers. Iran is non-Arab, Turkey is non-Arab, China is non-Arab, and so on and so forth. The Arabs that do not seem to be able to take their destiny in hand. So plus ça change, plus c'est pareil. Thank you very much.